Hello, 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 everybody. I am Jayme CheeseSlice. I'm the engineer producer of Uncontrolled Opposition, and I forgot to turn off the looping. I hate that. It's a setting, and I change it every time, or I'm supposed to, and it just won't save, and it drives me nuts. Anyway, everybody, we got a good show for you today. We're going to be recording for 1 hour for for radio, but we're going to be doing it here live on YouTube and Rumble and Kick and Twitter. If you're watching us there, thanks for watching us on Twitter. But we got a good show for you today. We're going to be talking about the JFK assassination with authors Robert Morrow and MC Armstrong. And we've got Gloria and Jayme. So let's go ahead and bring them onto the show. Hello, Gloria and Jayme.
Hey, everyone.
There you guys. So you guys ready for today? I know we were already having a good discussion before the show started, and we had to cut it off. So let's bring on our guests, and then I'll hand it over to Gloria, and we'll get the 1 hour recording started. So here we go with MC Armstrong and Robert Morrow. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great. Thank you for having us.
Welcome.
All right.
And the name is Morrow.
Morrow. Okay.
Yeah.
We got it. All right. I'm handing it over to Gloria. She's going to run with the radio show. And then when we're at the end, I'll come back on and we'll wrap up things. So let's get to it. Gloria, it's all yours.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Uncontrolled Opposition, where together we battle mind wars with truth strikes. I'm Gloria Guillo, an investigative journalist, and I'm here with my co-host, Professor Jayme Kuzmarov, managing editor of Covert Action magazine. Our producer and engineer is Jayme CheeseSlice. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guests. not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. This content is intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as professional or legal advice. Listeners are encouraged to form their own opinions. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963, in Dallas, Texas, while riding in a motorcade. Controversies persist around the single bullet theory, autopsy quality, potential additional shooters, and who were the executive plotters. Today's guests are noted experts on the forensics of President Kennedy's murder. They will walk us through pertinent evidence. We welcome independent journalists, investigative journalists, and authors Robert Morrow and MC Armstrong. As we approach this tragic anniversary, it's important to also note other grisly public assassinations done around this time, as they collectively illustrate how violent, murderous displays are used to achieve social engineering, and how other recent shootings, like that of Charlie Kirk, follow in their footsteps. Our audience may already be aware that the CIA has an entire manual devoted to training its agents in assassination techniques. As Jayme and I often discuss excerpts from its declassified 1950s manual that was revealed by the Church Committee in the 70s. Since this manual hit daylight, we've understood the targets of the predator class can be eliminated successfully without much fanfare. There is the infamous heart attack gun that shoots poisonous ice and leaves no trace. There are drownings of expert swimmers who leave a half-eaten sandwich to go suddenly for a night swim. Car and plane crashes attributed to driver and pilot error, never sabotage. Turbo cancer set off through covert exposure to toxic radioactive and biological agents, as well as routine surgeries gone wrong that unexpectedly become fatal. Then there are the questionable and convenient suicides, which include drug overdoses by non-drug users, physically impossible self-hangings and wrist slittings, and the infamous self-inflicted bullet in the head. However, in the case of journalist Gary Webb, one bullet wasn't enough. He allegedly shot himself in the head twice. Then there's Frank Olson, who reportedly threw himself out a closed hotel window on his shattering leap to death after he first gave himself blunt force head trauma. Suicide killings are so commonplace that John McAfee tattooed himself with the phrase whacked and tweeted in 2019 that if I suicide myself, I didn't. I was whacked. He was found hanged in a Spanish prison while awaiting extradition to the United States. So when we recall that there were no less than 5 public assassinations from 1963 to 68, we ask why their killings were done specifically in a way that elicits mass trauma. What does public trauma accomplish? For one, the spectacle of violence paralyzes movements and redirects rage into confusion and despair. Within this context, these murders are not merely about silencing individuals. They are about breaking the will of communities. In the case of a popular sitting president, this broke the will of the entire nation. The message is always clear: challenge power, and the consequences will be public, brutal, and unforgettable. Yes, sadly, in a span of 7 years, the deep state robbed us of John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Fred Hampton, and Robert F. Kennedy. Let's recall that in the early 1960s, the United States was on the verge of multiple reckonings. The civil rights movement was evolving into a critique of capitalism and imperialism. Black liberation was becoming internationalist. Anti-war voices were converging with the demands for economic justice. And these political leaders were speaking in what the predator class considered subversive tones. They were questioning the CIA, advocating nuclear de-escalation, and acknowledging poverty as a systematic failure. Further, all 5 leaders were exceptional and highly principled communicators that united and energized people across party and racial lines, both old and young, and they couldn't be controlled. As we often discuss on our show, unity is what the predator class fears most because, frankly, there are more of us. The predator class includes less than 20 families. Extreme violence overrides our rational filters. It bypasses critical thinking and creates an emotional opening for manipulation, whether it's to mobilize, paralyze, or redirect us. Violent spectacles create a climate of fear, which can be used to justify surveillance, militarization, authoritarian policies, and suspension of rights. But even more sinister is that violent spectacles desensitize us and engineer our apathy because repeated exposure to trauma dulls our emotional response through overload. Additionally, while public attention is consumed by emotional spectacles, corruption, war crimes, and unpopular legislation can proceed without impedance in the background. Lastly, gory public executions and highly televised killings serve as ritualized assertions of power. They tell us without words, we control life and death, watch and fear. John F. Kennedy's assassination in full public view extinguished hope because the goal wasn't solely for the president's elimination. The goal was imposing trauma because shock paralyzes, grief fragments, fear teaches silence, and in that silence, the system resets. It's not just the loss of a leader, it's a weaponized reminder of mortality and powerlessness. It doesn't require you believe the official story. It only requires you stop believing in change. And on this tragic anniversary like this, November 22nd, we remember not just that our president died, but what died with him. And more importantly, who survived? Who still profits from this silence? The PSYOP only works if we remain asleep. Let's wake up and ask the right questions, not solely who shot our leader, but who profited when the crowd fell silent. Thank you. To start off, Matt and Robert, please tell us about yourselves and why you each independently found it necessary to study the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And then, who done it and who benefited? Thank you.
Okay, I'll go first, just briefly. My name is Robert Morrow. I'm from Austin, Texas. I'm a political researcher and former libertarian activist, political activist. I was a big Ron Paul supporter, 2008, 2012. So in 2008, after the Texas Republican primary that Ron Paul was running in, I was one of the lead organizers in Austin, Texas. I was looking around for something else to do. I was just kind of poking around on the internet, and I came across a really great website called Education Forum. And that's one of the best websites to learn about the JFK assassination, along with the biographies at a website called Spartacus International. So if you go to Spartacus International, you'll find many great biographies of people related to the JFK assassination. And if you go to the discussion board at Education Forum, you'll find a lot of interesting threads on that topic. I was reading a thread at Education Forum that was talking about that Lyndon Johnson orchestrated the JFK assassination. And within 10 minutes, I was sold. Not 10 days or 10 years or 10 months or after reading 10 books, but after reading this thread at Education Forum for 10 minutes, I was like, yeah, you're right. Lyndon Johnson did it. So I called one of the posters was from Austin, Texas, and her name was Dawn Meredith. And, and I called her up, and she's a local lawyer here in Austin. And I said, Dawn, I saw you posting on Education Forum, how can I learn more? And she mentioned the names of a lot of prominent JFK researchers in the country. And I got their names, their phone numbers, their email addresses, and I contacted them. And then I asked each one of them to recommend 10 books I should buy on the JFK assassination. So I immediately called them up, emailed them, whatever, got those 10 books. Then I went to Amazon.com or abooks.com and I ordered all these books used, like immediately. So I got a very quick ramp up into the JFK assassination field by going to the best people, getting their best book recommendations, and here I am today.
All right. Should I go now?
Yeah, and I'm in the camp that Lyndon Johnson was the primary orchestrator of the JFK assassination. That's where I come from. Go ahead, Matt.
Thanks, Robert. So my name's Matt Armstrong, nom de plumes, MC Armstrong. I'm coming to you guys from Greensboro, North Carolina. My mother was a JFK Democrat who cared a great deal about the JFK assassination story. That was the first person who read me into it. As a child, my mother took me to see Oliver Stone's movie JFK when I was just 13 years old. Fast forward, I teach at North Carolina A&T here in Greensboro. We are the school that graduated the Greensboro Four, the civil disobedience who sort of started the 60s and the sit-in movements at the lunch counters, the segregated lunch counters. I've been teaching at A&T for a while. In 2008, while I was teaching there, I embedded with Navy SEALs in Iraq. And I tell you this piece of my biography to get to Gloria's question about who profits from these assassinations. When I was in Iraq with Navy SEALs in a town called Haditha, most famous for the Haditha massacre, I was taken across the Euphrates River by my translator, a Jordanian named Rami, who told me that if I wanted to see the real story and not the sort of orchestrated wins that I was being shown by the military, he said I needed to see what was happening down by the river. He took me across the Euphrates and across the Haditha Dam to see the burn pits. These were the unregulated waste dumping facilities where Americans were dropping computers, cars, munitions, plastic. We were burning everything, and it was all going into a toxic sludge that was heading downstream and was leading to just a rash of cancers already with the Iraqis who were living on the Euphrates. And eventually this created the Agent Orange of my generation for our veterans. You know, think Beau Biden. This is a massive story, and you might be asking yourself, what does it have to do with the JFK assassination? Well, again, to your question, Gloria, who profits? As I was working on my journalism for this story, which later was published in the book, The Mysteries of Haditha, I kept coming across the name, of course, of the company who had been charged with regulating these unregulated burn pits. The name of that company is Kellogg, Brown and Root, a subsidiary of Halliburton. Of course, for those people who know about the man Robert Morrow just mentioned, Lyndon Johnson, you know that Kellogg, Brown and Root was once Brown and Root. Brown and Root was a company, a Texas company started by George and Herman Brown, and they are one of the biggest, they were one of the biggest military contractors in the world. So if we look back at the history of our forever wars, and we look at the Vietnam War that made so much money for Brown and Root, and the global war on terror, which made so much money for Kellogg, Brown and Root, and Halliburton, and we see this sort of uniparty continuum from Lyndon Johnson to the recently deceased Dick Cheney, we can really start to answer that question rather specifically. There are a whole host of these military contractors, the military industrial complex, we call them generically, who profited greatly from these wars and from these assassinations, the idea of a president who might be putting the brakes on the war machine. But, we could really drill down into Johnson's social network if we want to, and look at Brown and Root that becomes Kellogg Brown and Root, a company that is still active today. So very quickly, but before handing it back over to you guys, I think like Robert, that we need to be talking about Lyndon Johnson today, because it's his social network that is still very alive and well, profiting off of, and quite frankly, addicted to war.
Well, that's fascinating. I did not know that detail. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Well, a couple things, and maybe Robert and Matt can switch off on each other. Maybe just briefly for our audience, specify some of the top 2 or 3 points that would indicate that Oswald was set up as a patsy, and then maybe let's get more into Johnson and D.H. Byrd and the primary evidence that would indicate Johnson. So go ahead, start. Maybe just with the Oswald and why we should regard him as a patsy.
Robert, why don't you take the Oswald, and then I'll jump into the primary documents.
Sure. Okay. So Lee Harvey Oswald is one of the most lied about people in American and world history. Okay. This was a young man who liked, admired, loved John Kennedy and his family. He was a U.S. agent, a low-level CIA ONI operative who was a fake defector to Russia. He came back to America and he ran around posing as a pro-Castro Marxist in Dallas and in New Orleans. He was, in order to understand Oswald, you have to understand 2 people who were lying about him. One was Lee Harvey Oswald was lying about himself. Okay, as he presented himself as a pro-Castro Marxist. The reality is, in high school, Lee Harvey Oswald was, when he's 14, 15 years old, before he joined the Marines, was absolutely obsessed with a supremely anti-communist TV show called I Led 3 Lives. And I Led 3 Lives is a story of an FBI infiltrator named Herbert Philbrick, who infiltrated communist rings in the 1940s and reported back to the FBI, and had these rings broken up by the government. And Robert Oswald, in his book Lee, which came out in 1967, said his brother Lee was completely and absolutely obsessed with this TV show, a supremely anti-communist TV show. And so, he joins the Marines. And then he starts studying Russian, how to speak it, the language, the culture. And then he gets sent over to Russia in a way that denotes U.S. intelligence by the ease of the way he got into the country. And then he comes back to America, and he's running around New Orleans, and he's hanging out with Guy Bannister down in New Orleans, who was a hardcore right-winger, former FBI agent, one of the top FBI friends of J. Edgar Hoover. And Guy Bannister was totally anti-communist and probably a hardcore racist and hardcore right-winger. And Oswald is passing out flyers with the address of Guy Bannister's office on it. Not some communist office or socialist or pro-Marxist office, but Guy Bannister. And so, then when the JFK assassination came, Oswald was immediately set up for it. And I have a very simple proof for you on that. In 1960, Marguerite Oswald was interviewed by the Dallas FBI agent John Fain. And she was wondering, well, my son's defected to Russia, but where is he? What's going on? I don't know. And the agent says, well, was he a communist? Do you know anything about that? And she says, no, I've never heard of him being a communist or a Marxist or anything. And the FBI agent interviewed his brother Robert and says, was Oswald a communist back here in the States at all? Did you ever come across that? He said, no, he's a Marine. Marines are in charge of killing communists. The FBI is in charge of catching communists. These are the heroes of Lee Harvey Oswald. So the FBI agent John Fain asked Marguerite Oswald, could you describe your son to me? And she said, well, yeah, he's 5'10" inches tall, 165 pounds. He has brown hair and blue eyes. Got that? So in other government documents created before the JFK assassination, Oswald is described as 5 feet 10 inches, 165 pounds. That's in an INS document from 1961. It's in a critical CIA document dated October 10th of 1963, 6 weeks before the JFK assassination. The description is Marguerite's. It's 5 foot 10 inches, 165 pounds. So you get to the day of the JFK assassination, and JFK is shot in an open motorcade in Dallas, Texas at 12:30 p.m. Central Time. Within 14 minutes, the Dallas police dispatcher is putting out this description of the so-called suspect. They said, "We have a suspect for killing Kennedy. He is he's seen at the intersection of Houston and Elm Street, and he's carrying a 30-30 Winchester rifle. And his description is 5 foot 10 inches, 165 pounds." We have proof of that. That's in the Dallas police transcripts of their police dispatch. Okay. And we have the actual audio recordings of that. Okay. And then 5 minutes later, they said, "We're looking for a suspect, 5 foot 10 inches, 165 pounds. The Dallas police dispatch was putting out Oswald's physical description 5 times within 24 minutes, from 12:44 p.m. to 1:09 p.m. on 11/22/63. They were putting it out there because they were framing him. They did not use his actual name. They used his exact physical description as described by his mother, Marguerite Oswald. So Oswald is, apprehended at the Texas Theater at about 1:50 or 2 o'clock on that day, and he only lasts 48 hours in Dallas police custody before he is murdered by Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner who has ties to the mafia and very close ties to the Dallas police. He's murdered on that Sunday at about 11 o'clock in the morning. He lasted another hour at the hospital. Lyndon Johnson calls the hospital and speaks to a doctor, Dr. Charles Crenshaw, and says, "I want you to go in there to that operating room, and I want you to get a confession of the accused assassin." Like, the President of the United States is literally calling a doctor in the Parkland operating room trying to get a confession so he can blame it all on Oswald and sweep it under the rug. So one more data point on Oswald being a CIA operative. One of his best friends in Dallas was a guy named George de Mohrenschildt, who was an associate of Lyndon Baines Johnson, who actually contacted Lyndon Baines Johnson's office, vice president's office, in April of 1963 and requested a personal meeting with him. And he got a reply back the next day from his chief of staff and says, "Well, LBJ is not available, but you can meet with his top military aide, Howard Burris." And when researcher Bruce Campbell Adamson found that document at the LBJ library, they were not very happy. The archivists were not very happy that George de Mohrenschildt, Oswald's best friend, was linked closely to Lyndon Johnson. And the reason George de Mohrenschildt met Lee Harvey Oswald was that the Dallas CIA chief, G. Walton Moore, asked George de Mohrenschildt to check up on Lee Harvey Oswald. That's why he met him in the first place, because the CIA wanted him to meet Lee Harvey Oswald. So I will stop right there on the frame up of Lee Harvey Oswald. He didn't kill JFK. He wasn't on the 6th floor shooting anybody. He certainly wasn't on the grassy knoll where JFK got at least 1, maybe 2 head kill shots. And he didn't kill Officer Tippit, because that murder occurred at 1:06 p.m., not 1:15 p.m. And he didn't take any shot at General Edwin Walker on April 10th of 63, because Marina Oswald Porter was forced to tell lies about her dead husband. So I'll pass the baton to Matt Armstrong.
Yeah, Robert, I'll take it from there. If we can all agree that Lee Harvey Oswald was not the lone communist nut that we were told he was, and that he was quite possibly not guilty of shooting anybody on November 22nd, 1963, then the question logically surfaces, who was behind the assassination? And before I go into that just a little bit further, I'd like to just mention to our listeners out there that the guy you just heard talk, Robert Morrow, he's one of the great, I would say, heroes of the JFK assassination research community. There is a sort of fact pattern or a fact suppression pattern in our community that most of us are aware of. We talk about it all the time. And it involves keeping this conversation, the one we're having today, quiet. We're not supposed to talk about Lyndon Johnson. Why? Well, there are a lot of reasons for that. But before getting into that, I think it's important to mention the fact that there is simply an overwhelming amount of evidence at this point to suggest that Johnson was the man behind the assassination. And Robert Morrow is doing, I think, more than anybody in the community to bring those facts to bear, bringing them above board, to use the language of Jack Ruby. So I met Robert a number of years ago, and I visited him last year on my way to Texas, where with the writer Andrea Williams, I interviewed living witnesses for the assassination and developed a book that I've just finished called Murder Most Foul. I'm very interested in this pattern of fact suppression, sort of narrative warfare that's going on with the JFK assassination. But to very quickly get to the point of who is behind it and how do we know that, I think very clearly at this point, Johnson is one of the major players. I don't want to sort of err on the side of hyper certitudes and say that Johnson is the only person. I don't think he's the only person. I think we should be hesitant to use certain words in this conversation. But Johnson, if you look at this story from a historian's point of view, and I was trained in history at James Madison University. For whatever it's worth, I was a history student of the year, my junior and senior year, JMU, which is a school very close to Washington, D.C. When you look at this from a history point of view and you assess the story from the key lenses of history, consilience, sort of independent proofs, a pattern of independent proofs and primary documents, firsthand accounts. There is nobody close to Lyndon Johnson who is indicted by so many primary documents. I would say 2025 is the most important year in the history of the JFK assassination case in the 21st century, maybe in the last 30 years. And one of the reasons for that is yet another primary document has come out indicting Lyndon Johnson. This is the Cliff Carter tape. And I think we can get into a lot of these primary documents if we really want to make the case, but maybe a place to start here for our listeners is right here in 2025, new evidence is surfacing. One piece of evidence is the Cliff Carter tape. It is a 1971 audio tape involving Cliff Carter, the former executive director of the Democratic National Committee, in conversation with one of Lyndon Johnson's close friends, Billy Celestes, a man who did go on the record in 1984 indicting Lyndon Johnson, pinning the JFK assassination on Johnson in a federal letter that was written by his lawyer, who was also E. Howard Hunt's lawyer, Douglas Caddy, to Stephen Trott. So in 1971, long before that, Billy Celestes and Cliff Carter, while Lyndon Johnson is still alive, they record a conversation that many people see as a kill switch, a conversation that will be sent to the public if they themselves are killed, like so many JFK witnesses. In this conversation, Estes and Carter talk about the Kennedy assassination, and Carter confesses to not only Johnson's role, but his own role in helping to cover it up. He goes further by stating that Johnson is on the hook. The two of them talk about Johnson on the hook for as many as 17 other murders, which gives, I think, some credence to the claim that our rather quiet co-host, Jayme Kuzmarov, made a couple years ago, which is that Lyndon Johnson may well be America's first serial killer president. Now, we go further into these other primary documents that corroborate the Cliff Carter tape, but I'll just leave it there for now in the name of conversation.
Okay, well, yeah, that's great, and maybe you can go more depth as far as I think what's significant is the motive, to go into a bit how Robert Kennedy was going to Life magazine and they were going to publish this expose exposing Johnson's corrupt practices and involvement in these political murders in Texas, and they were going to drop him from the ticket. So maybe you can say something about that, and also Barr McClellan. I think a good important book that was published some years ago implicating Johnson from a kind of insider was Barr McClellan's book. So maybe say something about that after.
Sure.
And both of you could weigh in if you want.
I'll weigh in very briefly, and then Robert, I'm going to hand it over to you because, as you know, I interviewed Barr McClellan very recently. Barr is still alive. Barr is Lyndon Johnson's attorney, one of the many from Clark Thomas and Winters and Shapiro, the law firm that represented Johnson. McClellan has gone on the record many times saying that he believes that Lyndon Johnson was behind the Kennedy assassination. But I interviewed McClellan last summer around the same time that I interviewed Robert Morrow. And McClellan gave me additional evidence that I talk about in an article that's coming out for Covert Action magazine here very soon. He went on the record for the first time about a man named Sandy Shapiro. Now, this guy's name does not appear in the JFK assassination literature anywhere. Most listeners are going to be hearing this name for the first time today. Sandy Shapiro was the first tax attorney in Austin, Texas. And as I mentioned, he worked for Lyndon Johnson's firm. McClellan let his name slip in our conversation. I recorded it for anybody who wants to look. It's out there on X, the conversation. He let the name slip and said, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Well, he did. And the name is now out there. Sandy Shapiro was the lawyer for Joe Tonnahill. Now, why does this matter? Who's Joe Tonnahill? Joe Tonnahill was the lawyer for Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby, of course, was the guy who shot Lee Harvey Oswald on national television. Joe Tonnahill defends Ruby, and of course, Ruby dies in prison. And shortly before he dies, Ruby, in a one-off of his own, allows to journalists that Lyndon Johnson was behind the Kennedy assassination. You want to talk about a primary document? Look at those 1965 interviews where Ruby indicts Johnson on camera. Well, his attorney, Joe Tonnahill, was being defended by Lyndon Johnson's law firm at the time of the Kennedy assassination. This is incredibly important. Johnson's law firm, to repeat this one more time, was in league with Jack Ruby's defense team. For years, the JFK assassination research community and this sort of LBJ suppression pattern has said there's no connection between Lyndon Johnson and Jack Ruby. Madeleine Brown, of course, has tried to make the point that there are all these connections, and she, unfortunately, is the recipient of a lot of misogyny from the JFK assassination research community, who wants to call her a liar and suppress her testimony, while at the same time platform Johnson all the time, who himself is a liar. So why does the guy who lies repeatedly get a platform, but why does the girl who's occasionally a liar, granted, why does she get suppressed?
And that was Johnson's mistress.
Yes, Madeleine Brown was Johnson's mistress. She was certainly an insider, but she was making the case in the 1990s that there was a connection between Jack Ruby and Lyndon Johnson, that these communities were familiar with each other, and people who uttered that claim were they were treated like nut jobs. Well, now we know for sure, thanks to Barr McClellan and what we can all see in the historical record, that Sandy Shapiro and Lyndon Johnson's law firm was representing Jack Ruby's defense team and their lawyer, specifically Joe Tonnahill. So we see a social network that is structurally connected. Ruby and Johnson, they were in league, and this is being reported for the first time here today and in the pages of Covert Action magazine. Sandy Shapiro was defending Joe Tonahil in a 1970 case. It dated back to tax fraud from 1962, which is to say before the Kennedy assassination. And anybody can look it up. The name of the case is the United States of America versus Joe Tonahil. And that's just one document among many where we see this connection between Johnson and the underworld that killed John F. Kennedy.
Quick point here.
Okay,
Go ahead, Jayme.
No, I was just going to add that from the McClellan book, I think Ed Clark was a key figure that he fingered, who was also at that law firm, who was appointed ambassador to Australia, and said that they got these big oil leases as a reward for helping to coordinate and provide the financing. And these were Johnson's cronies. So go ahead, Robert.
Sure. Key point to make. Jack Ruby hated Joe Tonahil and tried to get him fired from his defense team because he figured he was not working in his interests. Jack Ruby's defense team was horrible. They could not even get a change of venue from Dallas because it's such an biased environment. They should have had the trial in another city, okay? And they ended up getting their guy convicted and given the death penalty. Horrible defense team. They were tanking it. They were trying to get the guy convicted. So Jack Ruby's defense team was the one who asked for Jolyon West to come in. It wasn't the government. It was his own defense team. Why? They were trying to discredit their own client and call him crazy because he had been publicly saying in a veiled way that Lyndon Johnson was behind the JFK assassination. He said publicly if JFK had picked Adlai Stevenson, he'd still be alive today as vice president. Okay. When Johnson and his team got wind of that, dude, they went nuclear. And so we have to either kill this guy in prison or we got to make him seem crazy ASAP. So the defense team, it wasn't the government, it was his defense team that brought in Dr. Jolyon West to examine him and certify him crazy, which is exactly what Jolyon West did after one day examining Jack Ruby. He's the guy you call in to either call you crazy or make you crazy, okay? And so Jack Ruby also said that he thought the government was injecting him with cancer cells, a completely legitimate possibility of that era, because they were trying to weaponize cancer down in New Orleans at the time of the JFK assassination. And then what happens? Jack Ruby gets cancer, and then he dies of a pulmonary embolism, just a few years later. After the Supreme Court had ruled, he gets to have a new trial. Okay? So it was Jack Ruby's defense team who was working against him, and he knew that, particularly Joe Tonahil. Now, Joe Tonahil was defended in his tax case for 8 years, from 1962 to 1970, by Ed Clark's law firm. Ed Clark is a bosom buddy power broker friend of LBJ, one of his best friends. And the reason Barr McClellan is important is not so much for the entirety of his book, is because he worked at this law firm and he personally knew two of the closest people on this earth besides Lady Bird to Lyndon Johnson. He knew Ed Clark, who ran the firm, super crooked political player, and he knew Don Thomas, who was a business attorney for LBJ, one of the most closest people to Lyndon Johnson on earth. Both of those men, Ed Clark, who said he was involved in the JFK assassination to Barr, and Don Thomas said Ed Clark was involved in Dallas. Okay, and I took care of the voter fraud down in South Texas in 1948. And a third lawyer, John Coates, at the same law firm, also told Barr that Ed Clark, who Robert Caro called the secret political boss of Texas, or actually it was Reader's Digest. Reader's Digest in the 1950s called Ed Clark the, quote, secret political boss of Texas. Ed Clark told Barr he was involved in the JFK assassination. Ed Clark is one of the closest personal friends of Lyndon Johnson. Don Thomas is one of the absolute closest personal friends to Lyndon Johnson. So the LBJ insiders were admitting we were involved in JFK assassination, and we and LBJ killed Kennedy, and we're going to make a bunch of money off of this. Ed Clark was a lawyer who would get money on retainer just because he knew LBJ. That's free money. corporations pay you hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars a year to do absolutely nothing except solve one problem every 6 months. That's easy money. Ed Clark did not want LBJ to withdraw from the 68 race, according to Bar McClellan, because of the money question. Johnson appointed Ed Clark to the ambassadorship of Australia. Okay, so I don't want to tell people that just Lyndon Johnson was involved in JFK assassination. That's not true at all. My personal belief is that he went to his friends in the military and intelligence, who he had very close ties to. And they, for their own and different reasons, killed John Kennedy. So I've got people like General Edward Lansdale involved. You can Google him, notorious CIA operator in the Philippines and in Vietnam, a very close friend of Ngo Dinh Diem, who died in a coup that Lansdale blamed on JFK. Lansdale's personal friend was killed in a coup that JFK promoted in Vietnam that occurred on November the 1st of 1963. Of course, we talk about military contractors who made money. There's D.H. Byrd, who owned the Texas School Book Depository building, made a ton of money off the Vietnam War, very close friends to LBJ, until he took out the sniper's window as a memento and stored it in his home in Highland Park, Texas. Okay, so I've got him in it, and people like David Atlee Phillips, a CIA operative, supposedly linked to Lee Harvey Oswald, definitely involved in the anti-Castro movement the CIA was fomenting. Remember, David Atlee Phillips is from Fort Worth, Texas, so he knows all these rich people who know LBJ.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and his career was promoted after that. He was involved in the 73 coup of Allende. Okay, he was involved in that change of government, and David Atlee Phillips was involved in the change of government in Guatemala in '54. Are you catching the drift? Coup in '54, American coup in '63, Chilean coup in '73. David Atlee Phillips was involved in all of them. David Atlee Phillips on his deathbed, and sorry for me talking so much, on his deathbed, David Atlee Phillips told his family, I was in Dallas, because it was an issue inside of his family. Like, you hate Kennedy so much. His brother asked him in 1987, as he's dying of cancer, were you in Dallas? And he said, yes, that means I'm involved in killing Kennedy. Another person died in 1987 named General Edward Lansdale, and multiple people who knew him have identified him in a photo taken at the Texas School Book Depository building on 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon. And LBJ immediately resurrects the career of General Edward Lansdale. And just finally, in my little filibuster here, I believe that Lansdale and people like David Atlee Phillips and people like the CIA's David Morales roped in an anti-Castro Cuban kill team and moved them to Dallas, Texas, and assassinated JFK for their own political reasons, which were different than the reasons of Lyndon Johnson and different from the money reasons of D.H. Byrd. So I'll pass the baton to anybody who wants to take it.
Let me ask you a question, Robert. Let me open this up to Jayme too. You're elaborating and sort of mapping this team that killed Kennedy.
Sure.
In the 2025 revelations, we've gotten the George Joannides files. We've also gotten the Bill Harvey files. For those folks who know nothing about Bill Harvey, this was sort of the James Bond, apparently, of the American intelligence community. That's how he was known at the time. He was the guy who helped dig.
That's how Lansdale described William King Harvey when he introduced him to JFK.
Yeah,
I'm introducing you the real James Bond of the CIA. Yeah. I'll be quiet now.
No. I think that's a really important context. These guys knew each other. I think that's a very important point.
Yes.
And in 2004, E. Howard Hunt, the famous Watergate burglar, gave a confession to his son, St. John, in which he allowed that he himself was a bench warmer, a backbencher in the Kennedy assassination. This is obviously significant because you have somebody from the CIA acknowledging not only it was a conspiracy, but that he played a peripheral role. He gives a chain of command map to his son, and it's eventually published, surprisingly, in Rolling Stone magazine as well as Wired magazine, right? This confession. And the chain of command map puts Lyndon Johnson at the top. And underneath is a man whose name you just mentioned, David Morales, but also here is Bill Harvey. He also mentions Cord Meyer and a French gunman on the grassy knoll. But Robert, do you think that Bill Harvey was involved in the assassination? Because I know a lot of people do.
I don't, but he could have been, and he was happy about it. And when JFK got killed, Harvey said, quote, it was something like, it was bound to happen. Now, if he was truly involved in killing JFK, why would he be saying it was bound to happen? William King Harvey was a notorious JFK hater and a notorious Robert Kennedy hater. And Edward Lansdale was a notorious Robert Kennedy hater as well. That's in Max Boot's book, The Road Not Taken. Okay. But my point, I'm not going to say a firm no, but people like William King Harvey were. The reason is you can't have 400 people involved in the JFK assassination. You have to go with the people where the most evidence is currently pointing at. And with me, that is Lansdale over Harvey. And I'm willing to accept the David Morales confession. He confessed to his friends, we killed Kennedy in Dallas. And then he said, I was there in Los Angeles when we got Robert Kennedy. I'm not so sure I believe him on the second one, but if David Morales, who was the head of the Miami JM station, who was a notorious CIA assassin in Central and Latin America, if he's going to confess to killing JFK, okay, buddy, you're in. Okay, you're in. If Ed Clark is going to confess very close to Lyndon Johnson, the Ed Bar, I was part of that, or, I'm getting paid by oil companies on this free lease because I was a part of that. Okay, Bar, you're okay. Ed Clark, the secret political boss of Texas, super powerful guy, high level guy, close to LBJ, you're in too. It's out of your own mouth. Okay. So, but back to William King Harvey. See, I just don't think that he and Lansdale had a close working relationship. They did, but I don't think they were like buddies, pals, or whatever. They had common hatred of the Kennedys. I just need to have more on William King Harvey.
Let me just add one small thing to that, because I'm sure you're aware of this, Robert, but maybe our listeners aren't. I made the rather superlative claim that this is the biggest year in the history of the JFK assassination case in the 21st century. Obviously, the Cliff Carter tape's a part of that story, and the release of the JFK files last March is a part of that story. But the Bill Harvey release, which happened just a few months ago, thanks to the JFK Task Force. By the way, thank you, Anna Paulina Luna. Thank you, Tulsi Gabbard. And thank you, Jefferson Morley, for your help with that. But the Bill Harvey files do tell us something. And one of the things we've learned from these files, which were declassified just within the last few months, is that this guy who did know Lansdale and who E. Howard Hunt did pin as part of the team that killed Kennedy right under LBJ, he, even though he was employed as the CIA Rome station chief at that time, he was traveling domestically under an alias. I believe the alias was William Walker at the time of the Kennedy assassination. We've just learned this, and was in fact spotted by one of his own aides in Dallas.
Well, that's a significant data point. Yeah. I'm not saying he didn't do it. I'm just going with the majority of the evidence and whatever. But the point is, U.S. intelligence murdered John Kennedy. And that came out of the words of the mouth of Lyndon Johnson, who told Madeline Brown at the Driscoll Hotel in Austin, Texas on 12/31/63 that it was the rich fat cats in Dallas, in other words, my personal friends of LBJ, and renegade intelligence bastards who killed John Kennedy. Of course, LBJ had to curse when he said that, but we can't curse because we're on the radio. And LBJ cursed every day, every second of the day for like 30, 40, 50 years. I will say his favorite word was goddamn. We can say that on the radio, correct? Is that okay?
Is that okay?
Yeah. That's a word that you can tell is a legit Lyndon Johnson quote if the word goddamn appears in it, because he used that in every context constantly throughout the literature on Lyndon Johnson. So, yeah.
He also liked the word pissant. He referred to people who made life difficult for him as pissants. I think he would have seen Oswald as a pissant.
No, he referred to the voters and the citizens as pissants.
That too.
He would be getting on an airplane and they'd be 100 yards away at the airport, and they'd be waving at him. They're all for him in 1964 or 60, and he'd be, waving at them. Oh, you pissants! You ain't nothing. You're just a little pissant. I'm an elephant. You ain't nothing, you morons. He'd wave 100 yards away. They can't hear him. The media can't hear him. He'd be calling them pissants. That's his
Well, I
own.
think this gets back to Gloria's original claim and her original question to us, which is what's the legacy of this assassination? And that is a democracy, a group of people just treated like pissants for 62 years.
Well, the other thing I just kind of wanted you guys to just touch on is Johnson not only had a connection to the military-industrial complex, but he was also very much connected to the oil industry and the big boys of oil. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I'll be glad to take this. So of course, Lyndon Johnson, he didn't care about black people. He didn't care about civil rights. He fought all that stuff for 20 years in the U.S. Senate. The people he really cared about were rich people who supported him, rich, powerful people, oil men. So his big benefactors all throughout the 40s were, H.L. Hunt, big, ultra reactionary, super right-wing oil man. H.L. Hunt was in his suite at 1960 Democratic Convention. Okay.
And was flown to Washington, D.C. right after the assassination.
Yeah. Now, I personally do not believe Hunt was involved in JFK assassination. I'm in the D.H. Byrd did it, but they were all cheering him on. But Hunt was a major suspect for many people. Okay. Very close friends of LBJ. Sid Richardson, another mega oil man who died in 1959, obviously not involved in killing JFK. John Connally was his lawyer. LBJ was his political benefactor. Okay. D.H. Byrd, his name was Colonel D.H. Byrd because he was in the Air Force. He founded the Civil Air Patrol, but he was a oilman. And the joke was he poked dry holes. He failed and failed and failed until he hit the big one. That's why I called him Dry Hole Byrd. He made $1 billion off the oil industry. Very close.
And was a member of that very famous Byrd political family from my home state of Virginia.
Which was a hardcore right-wing family. Okay, that's Senator Byrd.
In spite of being Democrats, right-wing Democrats, a very hard political category for people to understand.
Hardcore, vicious right-wing Byrd political machine in Virginia, totally against integration. This is who LBJ's buddies were. But back to Gloria. So there's a congressman named Albert Thomas who's in the picture of LBJ being sworn in, and he's winking at him. Is anybody familiar with the Albert Thomas wink at LBJ?
Oh, the Cecil Stoughton photograph.
Yeah, okay. On the back of that photograph, an archivist at the LBJ library wrote, "Never to be released." Well, it got released. It's in David Lifton's book in 1980, Best Evidence. Well, Albert Thomas, that guy, okay, on the far left, he's winking at LBJ because LBJ's just winked at him. He's been sworn in. Who is Albert Thomas? He was a college roommate at Rice with George Brown of Brown and Root, who was LBJ's sugar daddy for 40 years. From the 1930s, George and Herman Brown, who were road contractors who built the dam in Austin, Texas, that LBJ helped him build the dam. He immediately turned them into defense contractors. They built the Corpus Christi Air Station. And then for the next 20 years, LBJ funneled as many defense contracts to Brown and Root as he possibly could. Brown and Root got bought out by Halliburton in 1962. And when LBJ, after he shoots his way into the White House, within minutes, he's calling his tax attorney, Waddy Bullion, and saying, "I've got to sell my goddamn Halliburton stock." Now, we can say the GD word, right? Is that censored yet? Because remember, LBJ says that all the time in every context, okay?
I think this is fair use, educational purposes. It's a quote.
Okay, all right, we can use that word, okay? And so Lyndon Johnson, the day of the JFK assassination, he calls his mistress, Madeline Brown, in the morning from the Texas hotel and says, "After today, these goddamn Irish mafia bastards will never embarrass me again. That is a promise, not a threat." He's calling her about 7:30 in the morning. JFK has a bullet in his head 5 hours later. And then LBJ, unlike everybody else who's blaming this on a Dallas right-winger, because Dallas had an incredible history of right-wing, far-right activism in 1963. Everybody else is saying, oh, a racist killed JFK, an oilman killed JFK, a Dallas right-winger killed JFK, and Johnson says, looks like communist to me. First words out of his mouth, 1:20 p.m. Malcolm Kilduff is the source on this, the press secretary, acting press secretary. LBJ says, well, we don't know what kind of communist killed JFK. Is a communist, really? Really? I'm going to tell you something, people. Richard Nixon thought it was a right-winger. The Goldwater campaign thought it was a right-winger. The left-wingers thought it was a right-winger.
I believe Jackie Kennedy had something to say about it as well, and I think so did Evelyn Lincoln. Am I right?
No, the insiders had a different point of view than the general public, who thought that a right-winger had killed JFK.
Now, hold on, Robert. Hold on. Evelyn Lincoln developed a list on the flight back from Dallas to D.C., and at the top of that list was Lyndon Johnson, and right below it was the KKK.
Right. But you're true. She had a
That's a primary document.
We have to wrap it up.
We got to wrap.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is like one of the most fascinating shows we've done. It's amazing, and you both are fantastic at
Thank you, Gloria, for having us. Thank you, Jayme.
Setting the scene and just allowing our viewers and listening audience to just kind of go with you into this history. It's just really well said as well. And a lot of the facts that you're bringing to our attention, I wasn't familiar with, and it's been a real eye-opener. And I just want to thank you guys. Can you please just talk real quick as to how our audience can purchase your books and follow your work? And thank you.
Yeah, you can find me on X, MC Armstrong. I've got 3 books: Mysteries of Haditha, which is about my time embedded with Navy SEALs in Haditha that I mentioned earlier. That's from Potomac Books. I'm the author of a young adult novel called American Delphi. Comes out from Millspeak Books. And very recently, Veteran Activism and the Global War on Terror, which comes to you from Bloomsbury Books right there in New York and London. It's about people like Edward Snowden who have risked their lives to tell the truth. I'm very interested in people, sort of profiles encourage people who are interested in the truth above all else.
People can reach me at my email address, which is Morrow, MORROW 321 at AOL.com. And I will put you on my JFK Assassination email list. It's Morrow, MORROW 321 at AOL.com. And I also have a blog called Robert Morrow Political Research Blog that covers a lot of the crimes of Lyndon Johnson, as well as other select topics.
Well, thank you. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guests, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. That wraps up our show for today. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. I'm Gloria Guillo, joined here by Professor Jayme Kuzmarov. Remember to like and share our broadcast. Your kind support keeps us going. Please find us on Substack, Twitter X, and Podbeam. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next week. Thank you.
Great.
Okay.
I was just letting you guys go. I didn't want to. I've learned from Robert. I was basically Robert's student. I didn't know that much about the JFK, and he was a great teacher. And also, he sticks to the facts. Like, I like both of you because you have a professional methodology and everything. I don't just listen to somebody and I look up the sources, and Robert's always referencing a source. So I check the source, and he knows all these obscure sources you would never check if you didn't know them. So,
well, I just want to mention, even though we're not recording now for WBAI or the Pacifica Radio Network, we are still live. So keep your pants on.
Yeah, guys, I just want to say I'm going to drop out. If you guys want to keep talking, I'll drop out for a little bit. But
Well, I'm
Jayme,
not sure how
thank
long
you.
we want to
Thank
keep
you
our
so much
guests.
for having
Hey,
us.
Matt. Hey,
Yeah,
Matt.
well, I think we'll have to wrap
Matt,
up.
you
But
say another 10
maybe
minutes,
if
or you
there's
busy?
I can stay
any-
another 10 minutes. Yeah.
No, we have to reward the audience. There are people on
Okay, yeah,
YouTube
another
watching
10
People
this.
want extras.
They
Okay,
yeah,
do.
this was
We have to
fascinating. That
reward them.
hour
Okay.
flew by. It just flew by. I
It
couldn't
flew
believe
by.
it.
That
the other
really
thing
did. That was a
I
great
wanted to add
conversation.
is like a lot of people I
Riveting.
talk to
Riveting
are
is the word for today.
What
Riveting.
series?
well, one point I want to make, or you guys weigh in, because like all these people, I talked. You bring up the JFK assassination nowadays, and they say, "Oh, Mossad," but like there's no evidence, and none of the research I've done has ever turned any evidence. And it's just that
None.
now Israel's unpopular because of the Gaza war, but that doesn't mean that they were involved in this. So have you found any evidence that Mossad is involved in any of your research?
I have looked, and it's been a fascinating deep dive because you see all of this context that shows that Kennedy did have a different position than Johnson when it came to Israel, a wildly different position. My God, he wanted to keep Israel from getting a nuclear weapon. He wanted to check their nuclearization through the Dimona facility, and this was pissing off David Ben-Gurion to no end, Israel's president. There certainly was, I think, motive if you're interested in pursuing the conversation, but you go down the rabbit hole, you see the motive, you see Johnson flipping the policy towards Israel just as he flips it with Vietnam. But I just don't see the primary documents indicting anybody in Israel as a paymaster or a plotter. I just don't see it.
No, I will go further. It is ridiculous to say that Israel killed JFK because you have to have evidence. You have to have more than just motive. Okay. Jimmy Hoffa did not kill JFK. He had motive. Carlos Marcello did not kill JFK. He had motive. Robert Kennedy deported him to Guatemala with his lawyer, and he was in a jungle, and he had to fly back to America, and he hated the Kennedys. But motive is not enough. And over 62 years, so much evidence has tumbled out on the JFK assassination. Now, I'll tell you who they indict. They indict Lyndon Johnson, D.H. Byrd, who took out the sniper window as a memento at his house, and who does not mention the JFK assassination in his book, who owned the Texas School Book Depository building. They indict General Edward Lansdale, who's identified by 4 people as being at Dealey Plaza, and LBJ immediately resurrects his career. They indict David Morales. A little piece does. Suppose he told his friends he did it. Well, you hated JFK. You were a total assassin. You're savage, and you admit it. It's kind of good enough for me.
Robert, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
And this comes from a conversation that Danny Sheehan had, I think, just last year, and that was highlighted on the Solving JFK podcast recently, which is a great podcast, by the way. Big kudos to Matt Crumpton and that crew. But Crumpton was talking about Sheehan referring to the CIA hit team that killed Kennedy being trained in Mexico at Clint Murchison's ranch down there, that the team that was originally supposed, the Operation 40 team that was originally supposed to kill Castro was repurposed. And this was the team that ultimately ended up killing Kennedy in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. Okay. He situates them in Mexico at Clint Murchison's ranch, that's where they're training, this 120,000 acre ranch in Mexico. Do we know anything about that ranch? Is that ranch a fact? I mean, this is a location that I haven't heard anybody other than Sheehan refer to.
That is like the plot line of the movie Executive Action, which came out in the early 70s.
I remember that long time ago. Yeah.
You need to rent that
Not
video.
like I was alive when it came out, but I saw it a long time ago.
You need to get that movie. And Mark Lane wrote that book, and Donald Freed helped write that book. Clint Murchison was a good friend of Lyndon Johnson. You know that, don't you? Clint Murchison was.
That's why I asked the question.
Hold on. Clint Murchison was represented legally by Ed Clark's law firm. Do you understand that? Okay, for years, and Wofford Kane. Okay, these are Ed Clark's and LBJ's personal friends. I'm not saying I agree with this. I don't disagree. Okay, but
This is also the founder of the Dallas Cowboys. Am I right?
No, his son was. The
Son.
senior was not the founder. Okay, and by the way,
Frank Jr.
Madeline Brown's fantasy about there being a party at the Murchison house the day before the JFK assassination is a big fat lie.
I think she's wrong about that, but I think Sheehan's onto something, and I think the Murchison Ranch was passed down, was it not, from senior to junior, the Mexico Ranch?
Look, I don't know, but listen to me carefully. In Kai Bird's autobiography on John McCloy went dove hunting in Mexico at Clinton Murchison's ranch. You got that? That's in the book on McCloy. John J. McCloy is he's on the Warren Commission. He's another close personal friend of Lyndon Johnson's. And in that book, it says they went hunting for white wings down in Mexico in the summer of '63.
And weren't H.L. Hunt and Edwin Walker spirited away to a Mexican ranch shortly after the assassination? I think there's a book called Farewell America that makes that claim.
Okay, Farewell America was written by pro-Kennedy forces, pro-Robert Kennedy forces, who wanted to write about the JFK assassination and to help him. Okay, and one of the authors, I think, was an intelligence agent that James Angleton was associated with. Just because you're associated with somebody does not mean you control every aspect of their lives. Okay. And so as far as your specific question was, after the JFK assassination, was he flown away somewhere? Yes, I think he was, because everybody suspected him. There are two people in Texas who the public thought did it right off the bat. Johnson did it, and H.L. Hunt did it. Okay. And I'm kind of like, as time has gone on, I'm in the H.L. Hunt didn't do it, but he would have done it, and he was happy about it, and he celebrated it. Okay, that's where I'm at right now, because there's so much more on D.H. Byrd. I will tell you, I think that every rich guy around LBJ in Texas either knew it was going to happen, supported it, knew LBJ did it, or found out after the fact by playing cards with their friends, like, well, Johnson did it. And the guy says, thank God he did. He's going to protect our massive old depletion allowance tax break forever, which is what he did. That thing did not change from 28.5% until after Lyndon Johnson left office. So I don't know if the assassins were trained in Mexico. I do believe they were anti-Castro Cuban related assassins for various reasons. Okay.
Robert, do you want to go a little deeper on Mexico? Because I know you have a friend, John Clarence, who is doing research on Johnson's sort of secret life in Mexico that even the New York Times was researching right before Johnson died. I mean, Johnson was being investigated for is it a money laundering operation that he was running at his Las Pampas ranch down in Mexico?
No, it's illegal for foreigners to own land in Mexico. So Lyndon Johnson owned a 100,000-acre ranch in Mexico. Maybe those assassins were trained there. Maybe, I don't know. That he owned with the president of Mexico, Jose Alemán, and the Mexican farmers were enraged about this because LBJ is a farming competitor to them, and they don't own this land. They don't get to cultivate this land. And they went public in December of 1972. And the New York Times wrote an article about this. It says Mexican farmers upset about LBJ owning a huge farm in Mexico. That came out on 12/31/1972, 3 weeks before the death of Lyndon Johnson. I promise you, people, Lyndon Johnson hated to be shamed publicly. He would have been going crazy over that. But back to what you were saying is this, Gloria, there's a guy named John Clarence who's an expert on Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon stealing billions of gold bars from White Sands Missile Range. Okay, the book was self-published in 2012, 2013. It should have gotten a Pulitzer Prize. No mainstream publisher has touched it. It's extremely well documented. Okay, and Lyndon Johnson was stealing gold from White Sands and shipping it to his ranch in Mexico, not the LBJ ranch out here 1 hour from me in Austin, Texas, out in the hill country, but Las Pampas. And he was flying that gold from Mexico to Vancouver. And John Clarence interviewed Fern Hamill, you can Google his obituary, Fern Hamill of Arizona, who flew those planes up to Vancouver for LBJ. A B-24 Gloria filled to the brim with gold bars. Can you believe that?
Wow.
13 trips, not one or two, 13 trips. Gold today worth like, billions and billions of dollars is what LBJ was stealing. He was a unrestrained serial criminal his entire life.
Do any of you gentlemen have direct memories of the shooting of JFK? I think I may be the eldest here, and I have a very vivid memory. I was approximately 3 years old, and my mother took me to the dentist with her and left me in the waiting room. And I'm playing with coloring books and stuff like that, and people in the office are keeping an eye on me. And just to take a step back, my parents were big John F. Kennedy supporters, and they went door to door. I had a sign on my baby carriage to elect John F. Kennedy as president. They were super behind that, and really many Americans were. I mean, it was really an amazing thing to have a young president that people could relate to, and he also had military experience and a whole bunch of things that made him really, and fantastic in his orations and all of that stuff, his ability to connect. So, I'm in the dentist office, I'm a little kid, and all of a sudden, my mother runs out of the dentist office, and she's got like cotton in her mouth, her hair is a mess, and she's wearing like the bibs that they put on you, and she's screaming. And I don't know what the hell happened. I'm a little kid, and she's going, "They shot Kennedy. They shot Kennedy," because she heard it over the intercom. They had like the radio on, as background noise while they're doing the dental work. And that really stuck in my head. I was like, wow, she's really upset. Something happened. And then, what I recall as a child is every station you turned on was the funeral. And that went on for 3 solid days. There were no cartoons. And, when you're 3 years old, cartoons are really important. So even at that extremely young age, I was made aware of social engineering. I was made aware of this whole concept of death, of this whole concept of murder, how even our president was not safe in this world.
Gloria, when that's an incredibly moving story. It reminds me of my mother. I wasn't born in 63. I was born in 77. But when I was a kid, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, my mom took me to see Oliver Stone's JFK. And shortly after that, when I was visiting my grandmother, she goes back into her childhood bedroom and she retrieves from her old drawer a copy of the Zanesville, Ohio Gazette, from the day that Kennedy was killed. And she handed me this sort of parchment copy of this newspaper and said, "They didn't tell us the truth about what happened." And the last conversation I ever had with my mom, she died of ovarian cancer in 2013, right around this time of year, 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. The last conversation I had with her, she asked me a question, which is pretty much the heart of the book that I'm working on, Murder Most Foul. Have they figured out who killed Kennedy yet? At the end of her life, she's got like a month to go. She is haunted by the fact that they were still lying to us about this. Of course, I didn't have the answer for them.
Children of people's parents who love JFK want to know who killed John Kennedy. And I'm here to tell you that Lyndon Johnson played an outsized role in the JFK assassination. I'm not saying he's the only guy who did it.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we should end there. Yeah. But yeah, this has been a wonderful discussion, and you guys have tremendous insights on this topic. So it's really great to have both of you. And yeah, we're having a webinar with Covert Action Magazine. They're going to be on next week. So more can learn from them. And yeah, it should be taught in colleges, and people want to know the truth. And these guys have the truth with them. So
yeah. I could
Thank you
easily
guys so
listen to this
much.
for 2 hours
you.
and in a blink of an eye. This has been absolutely great. Before we go, let me share Jeremy's article on Covert Action Magazine. 60 years after JFK's death, it is more and more apparent that Kennedy was a victim of a palace coup spearheaded by Vice President Johnson. This article is a very long article, but it's got a lot of the stuff that we were talking about today in the show. And if you want to go and check that out, definitely do it. The link is in the description of the video on YouTube and Rumble and Rockfin. Definitely check that out if you want to see it.
And yeah, and Robert really helped me with that article, so I could never have written it without him.
It's a fantastic article.
One more thing, the pictures in that article are absolutely fantastic.
I was just about to say that.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Mhm.
It's
All throughout it,
great
high
photos.
quality, interesting pictures. Who, a picture tells 1,000 words, right?
There's Lansdale.
Yeah, there's Lansdale. Oh, there's David Atlee Phillips right below him. In an article today, I would add in David Morales. If he's going to brag about it and say I did it to his friends, and he's this incredible assassin, and he's in the middle of the anti-Castro movement, and he's the head of the Miami JM Web station, well, how come he didn't do it? Either he did it or his best friend did it. All right. Okay.
Yeah, there's tons of stuff. The one name you didn't really bring up a lot today was Alan Dulles, and he gets thrown around a lot when talking.
He
about
does.
it.
Bobby Kennedy III was talking about him just last night to Dr. Drew.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have Alan Dulles in killing JFK. I have him as an accessory after the fact in covering it up immediately, and I have his mentor, his proteges, Edward Lansdale, David Atlee Phillips, involved in killing Kennedy. Remember, Lansdale was a protege of Alan Dulles. David Atlee Phillips was involved in overthrowing the Guatemalan government in 1954, along with, guess who else? E. Howard Hunt, another close personal friend of Alan Dulles. E. Howard Hunt helped Alan Dulles write the Craft of Intelligence that came out in 1963. He helped him write it.
Yeah, I think it's noteworthy that E. Howard Hunt, who is again a protege of Dulles,
yes,
he's not afraid to name other CIA names like David Morales or Cord Meyer, Bill Harvey, but for whatever reason, he doesn't mention Dulles.
Because Alan Dulles was not on the verge of being utterly and completely destroyed by the Kennedys in the November of '63, as was Lyndon Johnson's, whose demise was imminent.
That's right. Johnson and Hoover were both about to lose their jobs.
Yeah. It's a shame. I wonder what would happen if they had lost their jobs.
Good things.
It might have. Well, yeah, good
If
things.
Hoover had
in general,
lost
but
his
maybe
jobs,
it would have stopped this assassination.
Well, let me clarify this for you folks, okay? Alan Dulles was fired by John Kennedy. Do you understand that?
Right.
And there are many people, including him, who was very unhappy about it. And Prescott Bush, the daddy of George Herbert Walker Bush, wrote a letter to Clover Dulles and says, "I've never forgiven Kennedy for doing that."
I did not know that.
I've got it in my file. I'll give it to you. That's what Prescott Bush said to Clover Dulles. They were close personal friends with the Dulles family. The Bush family was. Bush family, total CIA. Okay, top to bottom. Lyndon Johnson was on the verge of being destroyed by JFK. We didn't go into that much here. There's a whole show on that. That's two. Edward Lansdale was fired by Kennedy. He was run out of the military on October 31st of 1963. He had no power, no influence. His best friend gets murdered in Vietnam by the Kennedy administration approved coup. Okay. Who's the other person who's going to lose their job? Ed Clark. He makes money off of LBJ. His income is about to be flushed down the toilet by John Kennedy immediately. He has to get rid of Kennedy to keep his money machine, LBJ, in office. D.H. Byrd makes money off of LBJ. He bought 132,000 shares of LTV stock in November of '63. Peter Dale Scott proved that.
Yeah, the eradication of the oil depletion allowance and the withdrawal from Vietnam would have been devastating to the Texas government.
this defense contractors want to make money off of Vietnam. The oil men who D.H. Byrd's both of them, and he's Air Force too, and he owned the Texas School Book Depository building, and he took out the sniper's window as a memento for his 16,000 square foot in Highland Park, Texas, a house I have been into, and I've been into that room 20 years ago at a fundraiser for young Republicans.
He hung that window like a hunting trophy.
He hung it, and he was a bit. Gloria, he was a big game hunter. Yeah, he had the heads of, lions there, tigers there, kangaroos there, whatever, mouses there. And
this is the equivalent of hanging John F. Kennedy's head.
Yes, but here's the killer. But here's the killer indictment of D.H. Byrd, the top one of all. Are you ready for it? There's a whole lot of evidence that leads us to believe that the far western window of the Texas School Book Depository building on the 6th floor was where the snipers were. Why? If you look at pictures of the assassination, that's the one that's the most open. It's completely, totally open. And there are witnesses who saw people in that window, the far western window. D.H. Byrd takes out the far western window. The western window, not the eastern Oswald window, the western window.
Yep.
And puts it in his 16,000 square foot mansion as a trophy. And he puts news clippings of Lee Harvey Oswald in the middle of it, and he puts it on the wall. That's killer. He owns the Texas School Book Depository building, and he takes out the window that I think was at Arnold Rowland, saw some dark complected people in there, probably anti-Castro Cubans. Okay. And after all the propaganda about the eastern window of Oswald being in there, a lot of witnesses say it was the far western window. And Byrd takes it out. That to me. See, that's why I'm more D.H. Byrd did it than H.L. Hunt did it, and Clinton Murchison did it. He's just filthy dirty in this. And he founded the Civil Air Patrol that Lee Harvey Oswald was a member of. But another big indictment of D.H. Byrd, he is close personal friends with the Air Force crazies, the most hateful, crazy people in the military who hated John Kennedy were in the United States Air Force, and Byrd is friends of all of them.
I mean, to put a final point on that, this is the man, D.H. Byrd, who owned the crime scene. And he's a friend of Lyndon Johnson's.
And he made a ton of money off the Vietnam War.
Yep.
Ton. It's a proven fact, people, world, YouTube, that D.H. Byrd and James Ling, two Dallas investors who are personally very close to LBJ. It's easily provable. James Ling used to have an LBJ bust in his office. D.H. Byrd used to land at the LBJ ranch anytime he wanted to. How do I know that? Because I know Mac Royal, the son of Darrell Royal, the head football coach at the University of Texas. And one time, Mac Royal's mother, Edith, who just died a year or so ago at the age of 97, was at the LBJ ranch. And D.H. Byrd, who is the biggest booster of the University of Texas athletics, he flies his own airplanes, and he has Bevo, the mascot, on the tail wing. He's flying into Johnson City, flying to the LBJ ranch. He says, "Lyndon, I'm in your territory. I want to pop down here and say hello to you." And Lyndon gets on the radio phone up to the plane and says, "Don't do it. I got company right now. You can't come here. I'm busy right now." While he's president, he's saying this. And D.H. Byrd overrules him and lands the plane anyhow and walks into the LBJ kitchen like he's the king of the walk. Cock of the walk. Okay.
Wow.
That's how close he was to Lyndon Johnson. So me, I'm more of a Byrd did it than a Clinton Murchison did it. Clinton Murchison's family celebrated after the JFK assassination. We know that because of Mae Newman, who was a maid there. She says they drank champagne and they ate caviar. They were happy. H.L. Hunt was delighted that JFK was dead. He hated him. He used to make bombastic comments threatening JFK. Okay, but there's more on Byrd that indicts than so far, and I'm willing to change than so far what indicts H.L. Hunt.
I don't think indicting Byrd excludes Hunt or Murchison, but I think you're right. There's a lot more primary data.
Right.
On D.H. Byrd.
Yes, they were all birds of a feather flocked together. But remember, H.L. Hunt was not really a part of the Dallas establishment. Clinton Murchison led the Dallas establishment. D.H. Byrd led the Dallas establishment. Jack Crichton, of the Republican candidate for governor in '64, led the intelligence group based in Dallas. These were the establishment. H.L. Hunt was a
Well, historians make that point over and over again that H.L. Hunt was sort of antisocial, that he was reclusive and he wasn't part of that establishment, but his sons were.
Well, let's point out that this reclusive anti-establishment person was in the suite of Lyndon Johnson's suite at the 1960 Democratic Convention. I'm not allowed in the suite of George W. Bush's convention. I can't go into Barack Obama's hotel room and hang out like, what's going on, guys? I can't go into Donald Trump's suite, right? He's not going to. They're not going to let me in there. Okay, H.L. Hunt, far right wing nut job, is in the suite of Lyndon. It just shows you who LBJ's real friends were. Okay, and in 1960, the black civil rights groups ranked LBJ as their lowest rated candidate to support because he had been killing civil rights bills for 20 years. And the two that he passed in 57 and 60 were diddly squat. They weren't nothing. And they hated LBJ. And they can't figure out how he got on the ticket. He blackmailed his way on the ticket the last minute. Which is the whole show we could do.
You'll have to come back. It's fantastic.
No, it's infuriating because you look at what they've done now. You go to the Lyndon Johnson Library in Austin, and they're selling Stacey Abrams books there in the gift shop. They have laundered this racist, this murderer, into the great white savior of the civil rights movement.
You can't support civil rights if you're blowing people's head off. And LBJ was murdering Sam Smithwick in prison in 1952. He murdered a U.S. agricultural official in 1961. And this guy right here.
Think about the disproportionate number of black men who were drafted into the Vietnam War, right? Think about Eartha Kitt bringing that point up to Lyndon Johnson in 1968, speaking it right to his face. And what happens to her? Johnson and the CIA destroy her career. Right. This is the great white savior of the civil rights movement. I'm sorry. I don't buy it.
I'm going to quote Texas Monthly here. Texas Monthly said that Lyndon Johnson would rather socialize with rich reactionary men who cared more about fattening a calf on their ranch than a whole family of Mexican hands. Okay. Meaning they cared more about one big fat cow on their ranch than they care about a whole family of poor Mexicans who are working that ranch. That's what Texas Monthly said about who LBJ liked to hang out with.
Yeah, Johnson was not the DNA of the anti-racist wing of the Democratic Party. I mean, never forget, Dexter Scott King himself, the son of Martin Luther King, went on national television to indict Johnson in the murder of his own father. I'm not saying he's right, but that was the opinion of somebody who knew something. That was the opinion of Dexter Scott King in, I believe it was 1997.
Yes.
ABC News.
Yes. Let's repeat that. The son of Martin Luther King, I'm going to repeat this for you people who don't know this, went on national TV in 1997 on ABC News and said Lyndon Johnson murdered my dad. Okay.
He believed the Martin Luther King assassination was a function of CIA, military intelligence, and Lyndon Johnson.
And I'm not saying LBJ did.
I have an idea. Okay. He died on January 22nd. Do you want to do a show? Come back on January 22nd around there? Well, I guess like a week before because there's a little bit delay as to when we get on the radio. And have a retrospective of Johnson's life.
Yes.
A shattering of the idol.
Yes. We'll talk.
Okay. Yeah, and then we can get more into those murders and stuff. We didn't have time, all those murders in Texas. And
Gloria, it's worse. There's the USS Liberty. Are you aware of the USS Liberty?
Yes. We should save the USS Liberty for January 22nd. I think that would be a good one.
I'll set up on that. But Lyndon Johnson orchestrated that. It was an intentional attack by Israel, 100%. And there's no way in the world Israel of that era, 1967, would intentionally attack a Lyndon Johnson ship. You're out of your mind. He's there.
And that'll be important because
you think it's better to do this on the date of the Liberty? When is the date of the Liberty?
Well, that's going to be in June. Let's pick LBJ's birthday.
Let's do it in January, because we can discuss all these things.
The volume is so.
And a lot of people are misinformed. Like about the Liberty. It's
yes.
the same with the JFK. They're misinformed about that.
Oh, but not only that.
Yeah, Jayme, you wrote a great article about the USS Liberty. When I want to share USS Liberty revelations, that's the article I share.
Oh, thank you. Well,
yeah, man,
it's great. Help me with that. So.
Yeah, you guys are my favorite professors and journalists. I used to kind of hate them, but I've learned to love them because of you. The reason why is
we're trying to evolve, Robert.
There's so much of this out here. There's Jeff Roach,
June 8th.
What?
I said it's June 8th is the Liberty.
Yeah, I think let's have it in January. The show on Lyndon Johnson. That'll be great. Yeah.
All right. This book is actually a really good book. It's by Jeff Roach. He's a professor somewhere. He has 3 degrees. It's published by the University of Texas Press. So surprisingly, it doesn't mention that Lyndon Johnson murdered Henry Marshall in 1961. Okay. This guy does not even mention the name Henry Marshall in this book. And he says that J. Everett Haley, who was a hardcore right-winger, reactionary, he said he's an idiot. He said he's basically an idiot, paranoid idiot, thinking that Lyndon Johnson was murdering people in Texas and murdering JFK and stuff. That's what's being produced. This guy presented at the Texas Book Festival this past weekend here in Austin, Texas. It's actually a great book, okay? But the cover-up of Lyndon, everything relating negatively to Lyndon Johnson is completely whited out of this book. LBJ's close ties to Billy Saul Estes are not even mentioned in the book.
Well, Robert, when I was listening to the Solving JFK podcast interview with James D. Eugenio a couple weeks ago, I hear him doing what you're talking about Roche doing, which is he basically rejects the LBJ thesis because he says, it's only J. Evans Haley and Billy Celestes who make this argument. As our conversation today demonstrates, you're talking about the Secret Service indicting LBJ, right? See Paul Landis's memoir. You're talking about Evelyn Lincoln. You're talking about Cliff Carter. You're talking about Bar McClellan. We didn't even get to the KGB, the 12/1/1966 FBI KGB memo. We didn't even get to Joachim Yosten, a contemporary journalist who was indicting LBJ in the 60s, right?
All right, save some stuff for the 22nd of.
Okay, yeah, I've actually got to run, yeah. But
one more.
Okay.
Joachim Yosten, the greatest JFK researcher of all time, okay? 1960s. He's on the case. He's getting it right in real time. The murderers are in power. LBJ's in power. The military guys are in power. Hoover's in power. The Johnson administration contacts Swiss authorities and has Joachim Yosten thrown in a mental asylum in Switzerland.
Really?
Do you understand that? He had to talk his way out of crazy farm to go be a journalist again because the Johnson administration was so supremely concerned about what he was writing. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, guys.
So that wraps it up.
Okay, yeah, we'll be back in January. That's great.
Okay. All right,
yeah, I'll look forward to it. This has been awesome. I've loved it. So,
okay, see you guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
I'll go ahead and wrap this thing up. And thank you, Jayme. Thank you, Matt and Gloria.
Thank you, Jayme.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks to everybody watching, and you guys got a lot of 30 minutes of bonus content here. This has been a lot of fun. We'll see you next week, and we'll bring these guys back next time or in January. We look forward to that. And I also want to say thank you to Craig Pasta Jardula. He's the executive producer of Uncontrolled Opposition. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. We are a presentation of Pasta to Go. Thanks for watching. We'll be back with another episode next week. Have a great weekend.